Fashion has always been a space that has fascinated me. Not just as a consumer, but as someone looking at the industry outside in and seeing a constant set of shifts that have been changing, not just how we as consumers buy, but also how the industry as a whole functions. What's also driven this shift has been brands that have started off as D2C brands, or rather direct to consumer brands, and evolved to a balance between D2C and what are traditional brick and mortar stores, while evolving their product offering based on the backbone of data while delivering it while leveraging technology. One such company that has brought back the bespoke trend, thank God, while expanding to an omni-channel approach is Bombay Shirt Company. And today I have their founder and CEO Akshay Narvekar on the show to not just talk about his journey and the evolution of the business, but what he sees as trends leading into the future. I'm Varun Duggirala, and this is Advertising is Dead. We're right back with Akshay right after this. Thanks, Akshay. Thanks for taking the time out, I'm glad we finally could figure this out in the middle of. We've had a conversation before this, and I've always been intrigued by your brand ever since it was first popped out. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Varun. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, one of the first things I actually want to ask you was, and this is my first reaction when the brand kind of popped up in one of my feeds and everything else was that India was innately a bespoke haven because if I go back a few generations, I talk about someone like my grandfather or anybody else, the whole act of going out and buying fabric and then going to that one person who would measure how long you wanted your sleeves to be. All those small things like you just have choose the button. I remember doing all of those things as a kid. Somewhere it all got lost with I think fast fashion is still more recent term, but I feel that it just got lost with us just buying supply chain stuff. So, what has your relationship been like with Bespoke, and how did this kind of culminate with that?
Yeah, I think it started off with a personal need. I used to go out to the fabric vendors, buy fabric, take it to the tailors, and more functional perspective as well, because I'm tall and have long arms, so most things off the rack don't fit me. At the same time, also like to design my own stuff, right? So wanted it to be a little bit unique. While I'm quite minimalist in my style, a few touches that I like to add to my stuff, and I used to do that for a fair bit. And after a while, it got a little bit tedious, and thought about it has to be a better way to do this, right? So searched for something online, didn't end up finding anything, and said, look, the next best thing is to try and build it myself. But I think also, like you said, this has been happening for generations now. It's the market was kind of fragmented, right? So you had multiple tailor shops, and everyone had their own favorite that they used to go to, or their
Yeah,
family
yeah.
went to, right? So I saw an opportunity there to actually brand something, to so build a brand and a company and a story behind it, and institutionalize, I guess, if that's the right term for this.
Mhm.
So putting all of this together, right? And I had some experience working in apparel and fashion prior, so again, it just made a lot of sense for me to give it a shot.
So if I go back to when you started this off, and I remember the first time I went to your site, and I could see that there was a level of customization. I remember that one of the first things I was excited by was somebody could actually kind of pop by over and kind of do some of those things. If you go back to the early years, can you run us by what that phase was? What did you kind of learn in the first couple of years in terms of just how adoption was? What you assumed consumers would be like, and what they ended up being like?
Yeah, so I have to admit I was very naive when we started off, right? So 2011, 12 was when we conceptualized it, and I said, look, online's the way of the future, and obviously something like this hadn't been done in India before online.
Mm-hmm.
So we quickly put together a product, I guess we call it, and
Yeah.
and launched something very quickly, right? And initially, obviously, there are impediments to what we do online, right? Whether it's asking people to give you measurements, touch and feel of fabric, and all of those things kept coming up, which we tried to solve along the way. So
Mm.
whether it's sending people to your house with the fabric swatches or to get you measured up and things like that, we tried
Yeah.
that. But I think the turning point really for us is when we opened our first store in Kalagoda. And that was about 2 years into the business, right?
Mm.
That really gave us visibility because people now can, it's a high footfall area. People see the brand. I
Mm.
think it gives you credibility, right? Because
Mhm.
it's not just an online fly-by-night operator that some people might think you are. So and also it gave us a chance to kind of interact with customers, myself personally as well in the early days. For the
Mm.
first year or so, I was there almost every single day. So learned a lot about why people shop with us, what are their needs, what are their pain points, etc., which kind of then helped dictate how we've done things thereafter. And since then, the strategy is obviously morphed and changed tracks multiple times along the way. We see ourselves today as obviously an omni-channel brand, and that keeps also swinging from year to year depending on what's going on. But the early years, the formative years, where we learned a lot about the customers and what they really wanted.
Yeah, you make an interesting point, right? If I look at D2C and its growth, it was primarily built on the fact that you didn't actually have to go to a store. But in many ways, one of the big swings kind of happen for you after you open the store. So, and because that's been a question, right? It's been a question like, are stores even relevant anymore? In many cases, they're like, it's like what people are saying about ghost kitchens and restaurants now. They've been saying about stores for fashion for a while. Um, I'd love to hear your point of view because it's something which I've kind of tried to understand as well. Is saying, okay, what's the balance between what is brick and mortar and what is D2C, and how do you kind of balance that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're seeing over the last couple of years, you saw a lot of the big online players move into brick and mortar after
Yeah,
having built a presence online, right? And
yeah,
kind of we did it, knowingly or unknowingly, did it the other way around, where we actually
yeah.
focused more on the offline as we started. I think from our perspective, the ROI, the traction that we got doing it offline was just it really worked for us, right? And so we kept doubling down on it and kept growing our footprint both nationally and internationally through brick and mortar. Now, obviously, given everything that's happened in the last 1 year, that dynamic has changed a little bit, right? So I still believe there's a role for the store in the future. I think what that role is evolving a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a bit cliche to say that the lines between digital and physical have kind of blurred, but it's the truth, right? For example, we have our stylists sitting in stores today, but taking orders from customers via WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Right? So would you count that an offline sale? Would you count that an online sale, a digital sale? Who knows, right? So I think from our perspective, it's important to have presence for the same reasons I talked about earlier, which is credibility and the fact that people can get to know about the brand in the first place. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a distribution strategy. So you're not going to grow because you have that many stores. So I think the role of the store has changed, though I don't think the stores themselves and their role is not diminished, if that makes sense.
You also mentioned this an omni-channel approach, right? Is the fact that you're obviously now spreading out into multiple different categories of products, etc. Um, any specific reason why specific ones were the ways to go, or is this almost a natural approach? Saying, fair enough, we've done it with one category, we know what works, and we can and kind of take some of those learnings, but also bring newer learnings in for the categories.
Yeah, so our journey's been somewhat of a long one, right? It's almost 9 years now since we started the business. And given that it's a custom made business, a lot of the tools that you need to grow the brand were not available. So whether it means technology and nothing out of the box really fitting what we do, so having to build custom technology. The supply chain is not cookie cutter either, right? To build every piece made to order, customized to an individual at scale, you need to sort of customize your supply chain, so to speak, to make that work, right?
Yeah.
And we had to obviously grow our distribution over the years. So when we started doing this and we spent tons of time now and effort trying to actually get this right, we realized that there's other brands and other categories who are on that same journey, right? Some maybe earlier, some as old as us.
Yeah.
And for one reason or other, haven't had the time or inclination to focus on that. So we said, okay, how do we curate a bunch of brands across categories to give our customers choice across the entire wardrobe requirements, right? So to that end, we've got a brand called Cora, which is a denim brand founded by a gentleman named Sham, who is one of the leading, I think, people in India when it comes to denim. So Cora is now part of our platform and using everything that we've built around technology or distribution, supply chain, and all of it.
Yeah.
We're going to add multiple brands across categories to sort of give our customers the overall offering.
One other thing, I think the two aspects that don't get talked about enough when it comes to fashion is technology and data, because people presume fashion is still, I mean, it's, I think the visual is very different and it's not considered a technology company. I was reading a bunch of stuff in terms of the stuff you said in the past, etc. And you always stated that you're a technology company, right? And that's almost the backbone on which you kind of build this out. And the more I look in this area, I'm realizing that people are kind of focusing on, let's say, custom fits using, almost like AI and technology. You're trying to bring, like, how do you kind of build solutions in there to balance out what is innately human and bespoke, but also adding in elements of what tech can add. So how do you kind of look at that balance of things?
Yes, I think what we do is less trend driven. It's more sort of classic and style driven, right? And people come to us for the quality, the consistency of the product over the course of time. That's what you look for in a customized product. And to be able to do that at scale, you need technology to help you. You cannot be reliant on processes and labor to get it right over and over again. And we realized that fairly early on in the piece, right? So, a lot of our investment has gone in building up the capabilities, whether again, like it's technology and the production side of it, or in understanding all the choices. We offer hundreds of choices, right? So how do you curate that down to what's relevant for most of our customers, right? So across touch points, right, you're looking at technology to help us make smart decisions, to automate, and more importantly, to make things consistent from experience to experience, because it's a high repeat category as well. And you want to make sure that someone who comes today or 5 years down the line has a similar, if not better, experience, right? And this wouldn't be possible without technology.
Um, and what if you kind of what if I look at Origin to now, what have you kind of learned about the consumer that's different than what you assumed the consumer was like? I mean, I know I spoke of the first couple of years, but I generally like to understand how that's looked at, how you look at product, but also how you kind of look at how you market to them and how you kind of how you kind of target it has become a bad word, but how you kind of like build stuff for them.
Yeah, I think the Indian customer now, and even compared to back in 2012, is a lot more evolved, right? So again, sounds very cliche, but everyone's got access now to very similar media and similar trends, etc., right? So I think the homogeneity between Indian and I guess Western customers has narrowed down, and so we it's no longer a game of trying to market to people or trying to sell them something, right? I think a brand has to stand for certain values, and it's around telling stories around those values that are going to make people either attracted to your brand or not attracted to the brand, right?
Yeah.
So I've learned that a customer evolves over the course of time, absolutely, and I think now they realize when they're being sold to versus feeling part of something or feeling part of being a community, right? And I think it's more about telling a story and telling what you stand for, and then hoping that that appeals to enough number of people in the demographic that you're targeting. And I think that so the way you speak to people has to change accordingly.
Has fashion always been something you've been interested in general? Has that always been something that okay, like this is something which I always want to work in? Was that a thing?
Yeah, actually, it has been. So I graduated in 2004. I studied in the US, and like everybody else at the time, thought that investment banking and consulting was the way to go. At least that's what my parents would have wanted me to do. And I actually started working in consulting for about 2 months right after graduating, and very quickly realized that this is just not the life I wanted to lead. A friend of mine was working at a fashion company in Los Angeles. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and said, "Why don't you just come down here? I'll get you an interview and see what happens." Right. So I did that. I actually packed up over a weekend, drove down to LA. The company is called BCBG Max Azria. It was a pretty big women's wear label. I think they folded up a couple of years ago. But yeah, so I just got into it. Got very involved and stayed there for 5 years. So it's kind of always been part of my life and my career. So when I got the opportunity to do this, in 2012, I jumped on it.
One more thing that really, if I look at companies kind of scaling up, right, is the teams you kind of build along the way and what they're going to take on, and especially for founders, it's a journey, right? How do you get the right team together? How do you keep them motivated? How do you keep them focused? How do you help them navigate all the ups and downs and all the pivots that come along the way? What's your general process in working with the team, building things out and stuff like that?
Yeah, if I have to be honestly, Varun, this has been the toughest thing for me. I'm still learning every day, right? It's been a long time, but I'm still learning. Um, you know, as someone as a sole founder, you end up doing a lot yourself, especially in the early days. And then over time, you're expected to give that up to other people who may be more specialized in certain roles. And that's really tough, right? Because you want to keep things close to your chest.
Always.
It's your baby, right? At the end of the day. And till today, I still find that hard. But I'm learning over the course of time that, look, the only way a company is going to grow is because you've got great people around you. And it's not just about having them around you. It's about trusting them to actually execute and giving them the freedom to execute, right? And like I said, this is an iterative process that someone like myself just needs to keep telling yourself. So realize now that my role is really giving structure and framework to what we do in terms of setting out a strategy or a goal and the broader vision. And then allowing people to execute, allowing people to make mistakes, right? So giving them the autonomy to make mistakes with knowing that, look, it's fine to do that as long as you don't repeat it over and over again, right? So So yeah, I think this has been a learning experience. I think I'm nowhere close to being the perfect manager, but
I don't think there is such a thing.
yeah. So yeah, so it's been great. I've met so many people now over the years and got some great people working with us right now. So just excited to work with them.
Any specific mistakes you learned a lot from?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very impulsive and very short-tempered a lot of the time,
Mm,
right? And you got to realize sometimes that people are working with you out of choice as opposed
mm,
to just because you're paying them, and it's
yeah,
not why you do it, right? But at the
yeah,
end of the day, when you sit back as an entrepreneur, you're driven by different things. You're driven by you have different stresses and different ambitions, and you need to sort of look at it from the other person's perspective, which sometimes I didn't do, right? I just
mm.
expected everybody to have a certain level of intensity, and maybe it doesn't work that way. So. Definitely trying to tone that down. I feel like I have. My colleagues might tell you otherwise, but that's definitely been a learning over the years.
I think that toning down does happen, right? And I like what you said about ownership is because I feel that if you're a founder, this level of ownership you will have and the focus you will have, nobody else will really have that, right? And over time, I remember having this chat with someone recently and saying them that you might not be able to find one person to do what you do. You'll have to find maybe two or three people to do that because you're going to do that level of focus and it's almost a journey, which is why I asked you about the team building, right? Because especially in a space like yours that's also been through an evolution. If I look at 2012 to now, just generally how all of us would buy clothes and what we'd wear, and the fact that we're anyway in this top up fashion, as I call it, since 2020, because we're on video calls and all we have to do is we're all living in shorts under that. Um, uh, I love to kind of hear how that has been. I mean, have you seen any changes in how people buy stuff? Especially, and I don't want to go what happened because of COVID, but I'd say that are there any specific trends you see happening in this space going ahead?
Yeah, I think so. Even prior to COVID, I think there was this trend towards the casualization of the workspace. So, people wearing t-shirts or long sleeve t-shirts to the office seems more acceptable. Personally, I'm only wearing a shirt because of your podcast today. I don't really wear shirts myself. I also dress quite casually to the office on most days. So, also when you're going out at night, people, tend to dress down a little bit. So we saw that coming. So what COVID has done really is just accelerated the fact that that's becoming just more the norm as opposed to being a trend in the past. So it's forced us to look at other categories, as I mentioned earlier, right? So denim is one of the faster growing categories during this last 1 year. We're going to be adding a third brand to our mix, which is focused more on basics, so around t-shirts, sweatpants, hoodies, things like that.
Yeah.
So, and like that, there's a couple of other brands across categories that we've lined up and hopefully can talk about soon. But yeah, I think it's forced us to look outside our core competence, which we've sort of avoided doing for the longest time. So, but that's just evolution, and I think it is necessary now.
It's interesting when you say that this whole shift towards how we dress more casually hasn't meant that we don't wear shirts or that we don't wear. I think in general it's a little, and I've actually noticed that even about your brand is the fact that I noticed the fact that the term that you use, which is saying we have a new drop coming soon, is almost something which I associate with the Supreme or with sneaker drops,
Right.
and I'm just seeing this blending of what would traditionally different worlds of the entire fashion space. Now we're all in the same space.
Yeah.
And what I also noticed that you made some interesting collaborations. That you've had collaborations which have kind of brought out separate collections as well. So is the way you look at how push out almost like different drops, if I'm using the same term, is that almost the way of the future?
Yeah, so I think I wouldn't say that drops and collaborations is something that we recently started doing. So I don't think we've ever worked on a collection calendar. I didn't personally much care for it from the very start. And so we just wanted to put out new stuff as and when we saw something that resonated with us, right? And I also feel that for a high repeat product, for people to come back over and over again, it needs to have new stuff available every time they show up, right? So the frequency of the products, and now it's called drops. It wasn't called drops in 2012.
Yeah.
Is what we were doing, frankly, right? And even collaborations, yeah, it's all the rage today, and everybody's collaborating with everybody. But back then, I saw it as an opportunity for a product that's customizable to have different people's point of view come out through the product itself, right? Because the world's your oyster in terms of the options. We could collaborate with different creative people with different points of view and give our customers a different take on fashion, right? Because until then, the point of view is ours as Bombay Shirt Company. But when you involve other people, it's a very different look and a very different take on things. So that to me kept things fresh and kept things exciting. And so we did that, have been doing it over the years, and obviously becomes even more relevant today in a cultural sense. But yeah, I wouldn't say that we've latched onto a trend there. Somewhat of the pioneers, I want to say.
That because I actually find that interesting because I'm looking at just the entire space and I'm just seeing it evolve in a way because what was driving this whole space was fast fashion, right? And I was reading something which you said and you used this term slow fashion, and I found that really interesting because what fast fashion has done is obviously we are a lot more aware of the issues with it and just like generally how people were like I'm guilty as anybody of just like generally just buying binge buying if that's the word to use. So how do you flip someone's mindset from if you've gotten used to what is fast fashion and to move towards this and what have you seen in terms of that shift and how have you worked with it?
I think what's interesting, and a lot of people don't realize it, that apparel is actually one of the most polluting industries worldwide, right? So 70% of what's produced each year ends up either in landfills or gets burned, or thrown under the ocean. People don't realize that. They look at, typically, industries like coal, etc., as being the naughty ones, but really apparel is one of those, right? So when you think about that, and the main reason for that is inventory buildup, right? Our model inherently solves for that. So we only make stuff for you when it's ordered, so there's no wastage. We like to make things that last longer. So I'm perfectly fine with you buying less and keeping it longer. In fact, we even offer alterations for life. So if your shirt, you change size over the course of time and you want to bring it back, we won't charge you for it. We'll get it done for you. So that's kind of the vision and what we stand for, saying, look, there's an opportunity to change the way the industry works and do it while having positive externalities on the environment and the way the world's going to go going forward. So we're doing our little bit there, I think. Like I've said this before, but if we can just be the tip of the spear in terms of driving a movement and getting people to start thinking in this way and having other brands also operating in this way, then I'd be super happy with that outcome.
Taking a step back, right? When you kind of bringing on people to work with you, because what I get from you is that there's specific pillars in which you've built the company, right? I mean, when I hear you talk, I hear specific things. How do you kind of bring people in, and what makes you choose people to be a part of your team, especially because people need to be need to value some of these values as much as you do, and what is your filter generally when you're hiring someone? What do you kind of look for when you're adding someone into the team and stuff like that?
It's such a good question because it comes back to your earlier question about how we assess the team and how people management over the course of time has kind of also evolved, right? Because in the past, as you're growing and growing quickly, you're just looking for people to join you, right? And if you're somewhat good at what you do, hey, you're part of the team, right? But as you've grown and you start realizing that you stand for something, it's really important to vet that everybody around you feels the same way about the bigger things, right? So, as lately, we're more focused on the cultural side of things. Right? Will they fit in with what our value systems are? Are they the kind of person we want to work with? It's probably more important really than the skill sets the hard skills that they bring to the table, right? So that weightage shift has really changed, as time has gone on. Right, I mean, if someone feels that what they're doing is going to have a positive impact on stuff around them, they're going to work that much harder, be inherently motivated rather than being, pushed into doing stuff. And I think that just solves so many more problems in the longer run. And that's something obviously we've learned over the course of time. So really focused more on people who believe in the same things as us and bringing those people onto the team and helping them evolve their skill set as time goes on.
Are you also seeing this being a larger part of your communications narrative as a brand, kind of like talking outward? And I'm guessing initially it would have been a lot more performance and stuff like that. But now, are you seeing that shift as well?
Yeah, in the early days, you got to focus on the functional benefits of what you're doing, etc. Right, really telling the story of why you should be buying our product. After having spent time in the market and hopefully having a few people know who you are and understand what the product does, it's kind of trying to bring them into the community and understand how this now impacts things on a larger scale. So the narrative has shifted from focusing on functional benefits and talking about the positive externalities from a much larger perspective and letting people feel that they're a part of that. And that's also been an evolution, right? So you're absolutely right.
There's another thing which I want to ask you, right? Is that a lot of people who listen to this podcast are generally students or people kind of want to get into the workforce or would have just kind of entered the workforce. And if you had to tell them that, if they want to be an entrepreneur, but on the other hand, also if they want to work for what are modern companies like yours, what are the skill sets that they need to keep in mind to kind of build on to kind of almost like, so okay, these are things which you look at, and this is stuff which they should really work on. What would those be?
I think entrepreneurship is about finding something that you're really passionate about before getting into it. You can be an entrepreneur and start your own company, but I genuinely believe you can be an entrepreneur within a company. It could be a big company where you're taking on a project. If you're working at a smaller company or a startup, you're definitely going to be an entrepreneur in and of itself, right? But really find a problem or a service or an industry that you're passionate about, because entrepreneurship is not easy. Regardless of what you see on the surface, there's ups and downs constantly day after day. And the only thing that's going to keep you focused on the mission is the fact that you're excited to do what you do or solve a problem that you do, right? So pick something that you're really interested in, because if you're not, you're going to give up very easily, right? So I think in terms of skill sets, again, if you're a generalist, you will over the course of time immerse yourselves in things that you're interested in, and you'll find your niche. So I wouldn't really focus on a core hard skill set before, when you're in college or trying to find your first job. Really find something that on an overall basis excites you, and you'll find your way. I mean, I've seen so many people come through our system, right, and find their way and get into things that they wouldn't have imagined they would be interested in. So yeah, really, it's more of an attitude and passion that you're going to bring to the table.
As we come towards the end of every episode, this is one section where I ask my guests a set of questions which aren't necessarily to do about the work, but a lot more do about you. And those questions have stayed kind of static, but I always find that I get interesting answers out of them. What is the one thing or a few things that you spend a lot of time doing and or obsessing over or just consuming, that most people who would know you in a general space would be surprised to know that that's something that you're really passionate about, or that's something which you really that you actually focus on a lot? What would that thing be?
So actually, funnily enough, I listen to at least one, if not two podcasts a day.
What are you saying?
I don't even think my best friends would know this about me, right? So I've become now a YouTube fiend, and I'm literally just watching or listening to podcasts every day. And you'd ask anybody I know and told them that, I think they'd be super surprised to hear that.
What are some of your favorites?
So I listen to a lot of, apart from yours, obviously, I listen to a lot of business podcasts, etc. So there's one by a guy named Jason Calacanis, it's about the Silicon Valley thing. So I listen to that. But wide range, there's startup operators, there's a whole bunch, but generally around similar themes. And I'm not partial to anyone. It's usually the person on the other side of the podcast that makes it interesting. So just depending on who the guest is.
Anything that you consume, obviously apart from the podcast we discussed in recent times, which you'd recommend, like just to read or just like watch or anything else?
So I read a lot of books as well, right? And again, similar topics and things like that. So all non-fiction, really. I read the book by the founder of Netflix, Reed Hastings, just a couple of months ago, and really eye-opening. In fact, I read two books at the same time. One is it's kind of an old book by the founders of Basecamp, which is a remote working software, and I think it's called "It Doesn't Need to Be So Hard at Work" or something to that effect. And then a completely opposite book by the founder of Netflix, and it just kind of showed me that there's two really successful companies, both operated very differently, but outcomes are very similar. And so that was kind of interesting to me. I recommend both those books to you.
I actually found the Netflix book interesting. I haven't read the Basecamp one, but I finished the Netflix one some time back. And what intrigued me about it is how he looks at a company and human beings as almost it's like a software, right? You're continuously kind of updating software and kind of tweaking it along, even though it's with humans in it. And I found that really interesting. Also happy that it wasn't just him writing it, that he got a co-author who had a perspective from an outside-in lens, because there's always been this conflicting point of view about Netflix culture. Like, people really like what they say and people who don't like what they say. So I thought it was an interesting way to balance out that whole conversation.
Yeah, great book. I mean, I recommend it to everybody who's on the show.
You also mentioned a little earlier that you mentioned about generalists, right? Is the whole generalist versus specialist thing something that you think about as well, just in the overall space?
Yeah, that was an internal conflict, right? Theoretically, I am a generalist, right? I have an economics and a finance and an MBA degree, but that really doesn't make you a specialist at anything, right? A lot of people have that. So I always sort of had that internal conflict about if I was to be employed by somebody, what are they employing me for, right?
So true.
And I realized over the course of time that that's not all it is, right? It's about the energy, the passion, the enthusiasm, hard work that you bring to the table. That's going to actually make you more valuable to your team and your teammates than a specific skill set that you're hired for. And so over the course of time, I've come to peace with myself. And in doing that, I've realized that when I look around me and try to add people to my team, I'm equally comfortable with adding similar people.
What can you put together in an instant?
It's a good question. Apart from maybe noodles, not not a lot else actually.
I haven't heard that one in a
Sure.
while. That was in the initial days of the podcast, one of the things that popped up, but I haven't heard that one in a while. But yeah, I'm always surprised people don't come up with that one first, because it's so ingrained in our minds, the minute noodle thing. And why do you think? And my general question was always, why do you think advertising will not die? But actually, my question to you is, why do you think bespoke will not die?
Because as things go forward, everyone wants to be unique. Everyone wants to have things that are personal to them, and are starting to get it increasingly across industries, whether it's bespoke travel or bespoke cars or bespoke clothes or bespoke anything, right? People just want stuff that's unique to them. And now that they're starting to get it, they're getting spoiled by it. And it's just going to it's going to propagate and spread, and everyone's going to have to do everything bespoke. I genuinely believe that.
Thanks so much for doing this, Akshay. It's been awesome to have you on the show, and I have a bunch of pointers from this, especially when I look at the space of fashion and how it's kind of evolving, and I'm so glad you brought bespoke back, although we are all living in t-shirts, but making me want to wear a shirt after a while.
Thanks, Varun. It's been great talking to you, and I'm finally glad we could do this together.
Likewise. Thanks for coming on Advertising is Dead. If you like this podcast and you want to listen to more podcasts like this, head over to the IVM Podcast website or app, or wherever you get your podcast from, and look at all the podcasts that IVM makes. There's some really fun stuff there.